The American people must be given a clear explanation of why Europe thinks its $200 billion trade surplus is essential to its existence, as well as a genuine commitment to fulfill NATO commitments. Additionally, they need to make it clear that unfair or unequal trade practices are not the cause of this surplus. I've always said that the craziest idea in a faculty lounge takes about 2 years to be implemented in the White House. That shows just how influential academia is. But now we have too many young people going to four-year colleges without learning anything of practical value. We are sitting on $1.7 trillion in student debt. Universities are deeply culpable for this crisis. Over the last 25 years, our fertility rate dropped from 2.1 to 1.6, a catastrophic decline. This has led to a generation, especially young men, who aren't getting married, aren't buying homes, and aren't having children. I see this in my own family. I ask them, how did you end up with $150,000 in debt? They tell me about scattered units. 3 units here, 5 there, and a whole decade lost chasing the myth of the 4-year degree. Universities are complicit. I've asked administrators, why don't you offer full financial transparency like when you buy a car? When buying a car, you're shown the monthly payment, total cost, interest, and full breakdown. Yet when a student signs up for massive loans, no one tells them what the average salary is for a sociology, psychology, or classics major. No one tells them the cost per unit or the long-term burden of interest. These institutions push federally guaranteed loans while facing no consequences for the outcomes. I've suggested, why not have elite universities pledge their massive endowments as collateral? If Stanford has a $40 billion endowment, why shouldn't they bear responsibility when their students default? Maybe then they'd offer more practical and valuable courses. Maybe then they'd scrutinize professors who can't teach effectively. Until recently, we had SATs because GPA couldn't be trusted due to discrepancies in high school quality. An A from Selma High School, where I graduated, is not the same as an A from Palo Alto High School. That's why the SAT existed, to create a standard. Why don't we have a similar assessment on the back end of college education? I guarantee you the current output at elite universities like Stanford does not match institutions like Hillsdale College. I've taught at both, and I've seen the change firsthand. 20 years ago, Stanford students were better prepared. Not anymore. If we required a minimum SAT-like score to earn a BA, say an 85% or a 520, universities would resist fiercely. They don't want accountability. They don't want it revealed that they haven't equipped students with the very skills their degrees claim to certify. I had a conversation in Silicon Valley after a lecture. A man told me something striking. He said, Victor, Stanford only admitted 20% white students in the last 3 years. We don't care about color, but to achieve those ratios, they excluded many brilliant students. He pointed out that Stanford rejected 60 to 70% of students with perfect SAT scores. In a bizarre twist, submitting a perfect score became a liability. He talked about the campus's therapeutic culture as well. In 2023, his employer gave preference to Texas A&M or Georgia Tech grads over Stanford graduates. Why? Due to their superior training, those pupils refrained from rushing to human resources at the first hint of discomfort. He clarified that Stanford had to dilute its curriculum and fabricate grades to meet the new student demographics. These institutions once told us that it was extremely rare to be admitted, that only the best of the best made it in, and the education was grueling. Now, by removing SATs, they admit that they're letting in students who can't handle the old curriculum, so why should we still trust them? That's exactly what's happening to Harvard and Yale. At Yale, 80% of grades are now A's. Meanwhile, costs keep rising faster than inflation. Students can't repay their loans, and the meritocracy is collapsing, not only in undergraduate programs, but in medical, law, and business schools too. More and more families are saying, I want my child to gain real skills. I'll send them to a trade school or community college. And I'm hearing from the elite, people who once went to Harvard or Stanford, now asking me, Victor, where should I send my kid? Hillsdale, Pepperdine, St. Thomas Aquinas, University of Oklahoma? There is a quiet revolution brewing in education, a shift away from empty credentials and toward substance. Universities once claimed that having letters after your name made you an expert, but now it's nearly criminal what they've done, offloading $1.7 trillion in debt onto taxpayers while raising tuition beyond inflation and producing graduates who aren't competitive. The problem isn't the middle or upper middle class, it's the credentialed elite, and we must hold them accountable through the media and through direct scrutiny of the universities themselves. November will be revealing. Yes, Republicans have their own issues, but this isn't about Trump or Harris anymore. After 233 years, we're not going to declare this country a failure. We're not going to say it's systemically racist, unfair, or exploitative. We're not going to tear it apart. Sorry if that offends anyone, but we're going to vote. We're not perfect, but we don't have to be perfect to be good. We're better than the alternative, and that's good enough. We've destroyed the border because we no longer believe in borders. Now 12 million impoverished people are here, and we're addressing poverty in Oaxaca and Chiapas, but here in the United States. And yes, they will likely become loyal Democratic voters in a few years. That was the plan, and they're not ashamed of it. These same people no longer believe in personal responsibility, not even for shoplifting. They rationalize it by saying, wealthy white people made those laws and they don't understand. This is their philosophy. Why don't they just say it outright? Well, they did in 2024. And people said, we don't like your border policy. We don't like your energy stance. We don't like your crime policies. We don't like your foreign policy. We don't like inflation. We don't like your stance on gender issues. We don't like any of it. The story isn't really believed by anyone. They can see right through it. A certain contender in Michigan was informed by one pollster, you'd have zero chance. Working-class Michiganders don't want you at all. You are conceited, obnoxious, and sanctimonious. He is currently searching elsewhere. He gave us gimmicks like equity highways. But history won't be kind to Trump if his DEI hires are causing us to cope with air traffic controller issues. Victor Allen Simpson, a former senator, came from a long political lineage. His father was governor, his brother a professor I knew well for 20 years. We used to debate, respectfully, about Simpson-Mazzoli, the 1986 Immigration Act. My point was simple. We granted amnesty without creating enforcement mechanisms. Border Patrol was pulled back, and employers were left with I-9 forms that were riddled with forgeries. E-Verify was a good idea, but it failed in execution. In 2010, Simpson was 78 and still traveling the country with Erskine Bowles, advocating for debt reform. He told jokes, had a great family, and was tireless. Their plan was modest. Simplify the tax code, stop spending, balance the budget in 5 to 8 years, and slowly pay back the debt. If we'd followed it, we'd be $10 trillion in debt today, not $35 trillion. And we'd have a surplus. We could still do it. All we have to do is return to our 2019 budget levels, and we'd run a huge surplus. Simpson had a unique style, conservative on some issues, moderate on others. He was hard to categorize politically, but always independent. Unlike today's polarizing figures, his mission was clear. Save the country. Jamie Dimon comes to mind here too. He's often unconventional, contrarian, well-spoken, and, I believe, a cancer survivor. He might be from an Anatolian Greek background, one of the toughest groups in history, survivors of the Byzantine collapse and the Smyrna catastrophe. What just happened isn't just a political flare-up or a passing moment in international affairs. It could mark the beginning of a massive shift in the global order, a collapse of the familiar structure we've known for decades. We might not even fully grasp what's unfolding in front of us or what steps to take next. But make no mistake, the implications are vast and uncertain. One key player in this unraveling dynamic is former President Donald Trump, particularly in how he's handling relationships with neighboring countries like Canada and Mexico. Let's focus on Canada first. Donald Trump has stirred a hornet's nest north of the border. His approach has sparked a revival of Canadian nationalism, something that had been relatively dormant. Justin Trudeau, once seen as floundering and preparing to step down, was expected to hand the reins of according to Mark Carney, the Liberal Party and the entire political apparatus were on the verge of collapse. However, something was rekindled by Trump's distinctive approach, which is loud, combative, and unrepentant. His proposal for Canada to join the U.S. as its 51st state was viewed as offensive in addition to being provocative. Liberal Canadians in particular did not take it lightly. That comment, along with Trump's repeated criticisms, have had a strange ripple effect. Conservative Canadian politician Pierre Poilievre, who had been gaining momentum, might now suffer at the polls. Not because of anything he did directly, but because Trump's words have made many Canadians wary of anything remotely pro-American. In a strange twist, it seems being anti-American is a more effective campaign strategy in Canada now than supporting closer ties. That's not just a problem for Canada, it's a problem for the United States too. One of our closest allies is growing more distant, not because of official policy, but because of personality clashes and public sentiment. Trump, however, does raise some valid points. First, the trade imbalance. Canada runs a $50 billion surplus with the U.S., exporting vast amounts of oil, gas, and electricity, while simultaneously protecting its own agriculture and timber sectors through a web of tariffs and subsidies. In some cases, tariffs on American goods like dairy or lumber reach as high as 250%. That's not just lopsided, it's a structural imbalance that's grown over the years. Canada is one of the top countries in the world in terms of trade surplus with the United States, and that needs to be addressed. Then there's the issue of the border. While most attention typically focuses on the southern border with Mexico, the northern border with Canada, long considered peaceful and uneventful, has seen its own set of challenges. Illegal crossings, the trafficking of fentanyl, though in far smaller quantities than from the south, and even the occasional terrorist infiltration have made this once-ignored boundary a matter of national concern. Trump's call to secure that border isn't entirely unfounded, and we can't ignore defense. Canada, as a NATO member, agreed in 2014 to spend at least 2% of its GDP on defense. Yet it's only contributing around 1.3%. That's astonishing, especially given Canada's proud military history. During World War II, Canada had the third largest navy in the world, and the Canadian Army played a pivotal role at Juno Beach on D-Day. Today, that legacy is fading. The country has become one of NATO's weakest links in terms of defense spending. Meanwhile, it benefits from U.S. protection under agreements like NORAD, which essentially place the burden of Canada's defense on the shoulders of American taxpayers. There is some truth to Trump's proposal that Canada update its shipbuilding sector and renew its commitment to protecting the Arctic. It would be strategically prudent for Canada to restore its once dominant fleet of icebreakers as tensions in the Arctic Circle increase due to China and Russia's increasing presence. Securing that important area might be greatly aided by just 20 contemporary icebreakers that are manned and maintained by Canadians. If Canada partnered with the U.S. on missile defense installations and joint Arctic patrols, the relationship could be reset on a much healthier and mutually beneficial track. But what we're witnessing isn't just about Canada. It's emblematic of a broader breakdown across the Western alliance. Take Germany, for example. Once the industrial powerhouse of Europe, it now appears to be spiraling into self-inflicted decline. The euro, which once soared above the dollar, is struggling to maintain parity. Germany is grappling with demographic challenges, energy dependence, and a wavering political will to lead. Ironically, some of the problems Germany now faces resemble what the U.S. once considered imposing after World War II through the infamous Morgenthau Plan, a proposal to deindustrialize and depopulate Germany to prevent another war. That plan was ultimately scrapped because it was deemed too punitive. Yet today it seems that Germany is voluntarily walking down that very path, not under outside coercion, but through its own choices. The broader issue at play is how Western democracies are struggling to maintain cohesion, purpose, and strength. Trump's critics often accuse him of being a destabilizing force, and in many ways, he is. But some of the instability he reveals was already there, buried under a layer of diplomatic niceties and willful ignorance. The tensions with Canada, the disarray in Europe, the NATO funding gaps, the imbalance of trade, all of these are long-standing problems. Trump just happens to be the loud voice drawing attention to them in ways that are often uncomfortable, but occasionally necessary. Even Ukraine, which has become the emotional center of Western solidarity against Russian aggression, is part of this larger picture. Europe, with over 500 million people, should be taking the lead in supporting Ukraine against a Russia of 140 million. But instead, it's the U.S. that continues to shoulder the bulk of the burden, militarily, financially, and diplomatically. Many European countries still haven't met their defense spending commitments, and their strategies for supporting Ukraine often lack clarity or cohesion. Trump's pressure on NATO and his calls for accountability aren't just about being stingy or isolationist, they're about fairness and sustainability. What's striking is that during Trump's presidency, for all the noise and controversy, Putin didn't expand his borders. No invasions, no new wars. Compare that to what happened before and after Georgia, Crimea, Donbass, and now a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Yet Trump is still portrayed by many as a Russian puppet, despite being the one who sanctioned Nord Stream 2, armed Ukraine with javelins, and challenged NATO to step up. Meanwhile, those who appeased Russia for years are rarely questioned. This isn't to say Trump has all the answers. Far from it. His methods are often divisive, his words inflammatory, and his diplomacy unconventional. But the questions he raises, the imbalances he highlights, and the confrontations he provokes are real. They force us to confront uncomfortable truths about the state of the world, the reliability of our allies, and the sustainability of the post-World War II order. Where does all of this end up? The future is unclear. Will Canada reevaluate its defense and trade strategies? Will Europe be responsible for its own security at last? While taking criticism from those it defends, will the United States continue to bear the burden of the free world? Or is the international order as we know it shifting, fracturing, or perhaps collapsing as a result of our collective actions as a global community? We might not have all the answers right now, but one thing is certain. What just happened is more than just a political spat. It's a signal that the old assumptions no longer hold, and the world we thought we understood is changing faster than we can predict.